Chapter 1. Have you ever been struck by lightning? I have. I write not of the sparkling that bolts from the sky, but of gold, the yellow metal buried in the earth, and the shadow-wit world of those who seek it. That world turned me topsy-turvy, so that I did things I never dreamed I would or could do. It began fittingly in a leap year, 1848. I was 13 years old. My family, father, Randolph Blydell, mother, Abigail Pell Blydell, my younger brother Jacob, and I, Victoria, most often called Tori, was residing in the smallest state in these United States, Rhode Island. We had a home in Providence, the state's major city, with its fine buildings, wealth, tranquility, and a population of 40,000. Our home was 15 Sheldon Street, a modest but agreeable wooden house on the east side of town. It stood upon the hill, as it was smartly called, above commercial Wickenden Street. We had a cook and one servant, both of whom lived in our attic. Our lives were comfortable, with nothing unusual ever happening. Indeed, my early family life was untroubled, as smooth as Chinese silk. I questioned nothing, not about the world or about myself. My entire universe was Sheldon Street, which meant I knew everyone as they knew me. As for my social life, it consisted of calling and receiving among a small group of proper neighborhood girls. As one grows up, it can take a while to understand that sometimes it is not your mother or father who have the greatest influence on your life. Thus it was but gradually that I came to realize that the person who shaped my life more than any other was my mother's older sister, Aunt Lavinia. Since the two sisters were from the distinguished Rhode Island Pell family, Lavinia already considered herself quite the queen. Then, before I was born, she married Quincy Fellows, a wealthy Pawtucket cloth factory owner. That made her, in her mind, an empress. A tall, big woman with hanging coils of braid alongside her puffy face, which peered out from a deep, dark bonnet. She wore long, wide gowns with bulging sleeves, a shape that made me think of her as a walking mountain, and a volcano at that. Indeed, she constantly interrupted with lava-like judgments, advice, and instructions as to how my family should live our lives. All of which is to say, while my mother and father raised me, their words were almost always prefaced by, "As your Aunt Lavinia suggests." One of Aunt Lavinia's judgments, which I was shocked to discover, was that my mother had lowered her station in life by marrying my father. Father was a man of middle age and modest height. Quite portly, he had a round, smooth, shaved face, and fair hair brushed with care. His soft pink hands, somewhat ink-stained, were what you would expect of someone who wielded pen, not pickaxe. At home or at work he attired himself in common gentleman's fashion: English frock coat, vest, knotted neckcloth, tan pants, and tall black silk hat. He worked as an accountant for Pratt & Willinghast, a respectable trading business, which had its offices on Peck Street in the middle of Providence. Significantly, it was a position secured for him by Aunt Lavinia's husband, a fact which she did not let father or mother forget. Still, after 10 years of service, father received a silver pocket watch in recognition of his good work. He liked to bring it out at regular intervals so as to suggest that he was a busy man. In fact, I came to understand it was displayed mostly to show Aunt Lavinia that he was worthy. But then, as I came to realize, father's highest ambition was to become acceptable to Aunt Lavinia, and he chose to do so by agreeing to all her advice and judgments. As for my mother, she had a kind-hearted, loving nature, and looked after us all, trying her best to shield us from her sister's dictates. By way of personal occupation, other than supervising her children's upbringing and managing the household, she had her reading, popular romances such as The Betrothed, and needlework to do. Yet while mother was a quiet soul, sometimes when I watched her sewing, it seemed as if she were frustrated with her life and used her needle to pierce the fabric of her world. Exasperated by my parents' constant deference to Aunt Lavinia, it was upon my younger brother Jacob that I bestowed my deepest affections. More than anyone else, he was willing to listen to my endless prattle. Most of all, he didn't criticize me. We were as close as kin can be, and I enjoyed his company greatly. Jacob, 4 years younger than I, had a pleasing apple-cheek sweetness. An earnest, serious, almost solemn boy, he was not given to mischief. When he played with his school friends, he did so quietly, without much zest. He was fond of music and enjoyed whistling the popular songs of the day. That said, his whistling told me that he was troubled. Whereas Jacob considered me hot-brained, he fretted far too much, and worry made him agitated. Jacob appeared to be the least bothered by how much our lives were governed by my aunt. But then it was Jacob of whom Aunt Lavinia most approved. She, who had no children of her own, once said, "Jacob is a perfect child. He is quiet and does what he is told. We should all encourage Victoria to be more like her brother." Once she informed me, "You should know, Victoria, that some day Jacob will be the head of the family and you will need to defer to him." Young though I was much distressed, and replied, "Jacob shall have his life, I shall have mine." To which Aunt Lavinia scolded, "Nonsense! A girl's life should be solely dedicated to taking care of others." I'm sure that made me pout-mouthed. Because I resisted my aunt's dictates, she was particularly harsh on me, finding me too independent, too bold, and far too free with my opinions. But the truth is, there were few aspects of my life which did not come under her firm declarations. Victoria should dress this way. That meant, for example, that I must never go outside without gloves and bonnet. Victoria should have proper acquaintances. This meant that the Misses Biggs were not suitable friends, whereas the Misses Colchester were. I was never told the reasons. Victoria should be taking dancing lessons from Mrs. Coldbreath's Academy of Dancery. I attended weekly. And to call Victoria Tory is vulgar. Once, I was no more than 10, she told me, "Unless you change your opinionated ways, you will not find a suitable man willing to marry you." My retort was, "I intend to remain self-governing." When Jacob turned 6 and I was 10, he began to attend a school selected by my aunt, the Rhode Island Institute of Instruction, in Providence. She further proclaimed that it was sufficient for a girl to be educated at home, save Sunday church school. My parents did as she advised. I did not go to school. Whereas Jacob went to school tamely, I objected to not going, and did so strongly. Why, I argued, should I not get an education? Was I not the eldest child? Was I not quick-witted and eager? Father consulted his pocket-watch and said, "We shall do what Aunt Lavinia advises." While I did not go to school, my mother sympathized with me. She took it upon herself to teach me to read and write, as, she told me, her mother had taught her. Additionally, I secretly persuaded Jacob to share all his school lessons with me. That allowed me to be educated on my own, furtively. The truth is, I far surpassed him. I was therefore soon reading a great deal. Alas, the books in our home were too few, too limited. Having a desire for more knowledge, I took such small moneys as I had saved, birthday and Christmas gifts, and telling no one, walked downhill to the Providence Athenaeum, the city's fine library. But when I placed my spare coins on the counter, and informed the white-haired gentleman secretary that I wished to purchase a membership, he told me I had not nearly enough. Disappointment must have clouded my face. The secretary considered me with a kindly smile, paused a long moment, and then leaned down and whispered, "Since you are so young and eager, I shall give you a free subscription. But," he added, finger to his lips, "you must not tell anyone." I went from rejection to rapture. I borrowed books and hid them in my private room. At night, while the whole house slept, I read voraciously by candlelight, and learned that stealthy reading is absolutely sublime. Reading became my other world. I discovered and consumed volumes by Mr. Poe, Mr. Dickens, and Miss Austen. Did I understand them all? Of course not. But then people do not generally grasp the true value of reading. It is not to learn about others, it is to learn about oneself. Thus it was that I came upon the recently published autobiography of Jane Eyre. That book transformed my life.